Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Galizia of The Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. I am thrilled to welcome today's guest to the podcast. Christie Purifoy is not only a talented writer, but also a dedicated gardener whose passion for cultivating beauty and wonder shines through in her work. With a PhD in English literature from the University of Chicago and a background in teaching, Christie brings a unique perspective to her exploration of gardens and literature. Christie's literary contributions include several inspiring garden books, including Garden Maker, Growing a Life of Beauty and Wonder with Flowers, Roots and Sky, A Journey Home in 4 Seasons, and Placemaker, Cultivating Places of Comfort, Beauty, and Peace. Through her writing, she eloquently captures the essence of gardening and the profound connections between nature and the human experience. At her Victorian farmhouse in southeastern Pennsylvania, Christie's love for gardening blossoms as she tends to her beloved plants and explores the timeless beauty of her surroundings. Today's guest brings a unique perspective that I believe both cut flower gardeners and flower farmers alike will find relatable and inspiring. Being a gardener or a flower farmer gives us a unique opportunity to connect with nature, and I can't wait to chat with Christine about how gardens grow roots, connection, wholeness, and hope. Please join me in welcoming Christie Purifoy to the podcast.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. I'm so grateful for that. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to visiting with you about your experience in the garden. And I believe you bring a really unique perspective to the table that will just provide so much inspiration and insight for so many of us. So to get started, could you share a little bit about your background into gardening?
Sure. Well, I think in some ways I'm the least likely gardener. I wasn't big for the outdoors growing up in Texas. I was always inside reading a book. My father was a gardener, so I was exposed to that. He had a beautiful rose garden. I was exposed to the beauty, but I never imagined that I would do anything like that. I wasn't interested in science. I like to be indoors. But when I was in graduate school in Chicago, a friend of mine, out of the blue, just invited me to share a plot in a community garden with her. And I was flabbergasted. I would never have thought of doing that on my own. It was not on my radar at all. But I was pregnant with my first child at the time. And I think there is something about that season of life where all of a sudden the things that our parents did take on new meaning for us. And so I said yes. And I was terrible. We were all terrible. We mostly grew weeds and were an embarrassment to the whole community garden there on the south side of Chicago. But it was my introduction, and it was the thing that hooked me. And so when I left Chicago and had homes of my own, that was something I brought with me. But my journey has really been from starting kind of a typical backyard gardener, trying to grow some tomatoes, some lettuces, to being absolutely smitten by flowers. And so it was adding a few flowers to the vegetable garden. And then more and more, my vegetable garden was given over to flowers that I realized, oh, for me, this is where it's at, the beauty of flowers. And that is really what changed my life.
Flowers really are magical.
They are. They are. Yes. And, you know, as a writer and someone who loves stories, being able to capture the magic of flowers in my storytelling, in my writing, I hope. I hope it just opens a door for more people who might not realize that this could be for them. Because I was once that person who didn't know that gardening would change my life, who had no idea how much it would mean to me. So I feel very passionate about just sharing the magic of it, the romance of it, as well as the realities of it. It's good to know it isn't all a bed of roses, I guess. That it's hard work too, but it is so worthwhile. So yeah, that's really what I'm trying to do through these books.
I love it. Well, I'm going to spill the beans here earlier than I had planned. The reason we're chatting is because you have a brand new book that is, well, it was just released,
Hmm.
and that book is Seed Time and Harvest. And I am fortunate to have an advance copy of the book, and it is amazing. I am gleaning so much from reading it right now, and it's so inspiring and just reminds me why I love what I do. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into writing this book?
Yeah, I'm glad you said it that way, actually, because the initial sort of working title for myself as I was writing it was "Why Gardening Matters." I
Oh, I
think of
love
it as
that.
as my quiet manifesto. I just think gardening matters so much, and what I was trying to capture in this book through the photographs and through the storytelling, and even through the tips. There's some practical tips in there. Is this sense of the kind of abundant life that is thriving in a garden. That gardens aren't just the place where we grow plants, they aren't just the place where we harvest flowers, but they are a place where all the various bits of life in our world are coming together and are being reconciled and connected, and that this is something that's happening in us and in our gardens, and just this general sense of like overwhelming goodness and abundance, and the idea of the garden being the place where those of us who feel fragmented or disconnected or rootless or wandering or hopeless. I have found in my own life that it is the garden that is the place where these things work themselves out so beautifully. And so yeah, the whole book is just a celebration of that life of the garden. So whereas I tend to focus on more on flowers, only on flowers in my other gardening books, this one has flowers, but it's got all the goodness, the insects, the animals, the vegetables, the trees, the herbs, the neighbor children, all of that life, chickens. I could go on and on. All that life that is drawn to a garden was something I wanted to capture in Seed Time and Harvest.
I love that. Well, I would love to chat with you today, if it's okay, about your book and some of
Hmm.
the topics that you covered in it that really resonated with me, and I'm sure will also resonate with our listeners. So, on the cover of your book, it says How Gardens Grow Roots, Connection, Wholeness, and Hope. Let's talk about those roots. What are the roots, metaphorically speaking and also physically speaking, that you have experienced in your own garden?
Yeah, well, we live in such a mobile society. We're moving. That very few of us get to stay in one place, for our whole lives. So I've been following online as you've been moving so many of your plants, and as you've been in search of a permanent place. So this is just a reality of our modern life. And what I love about gardening, what I love about growing flowers, is that even if we move, gardens help us so quickly to feel rooted in a place. I mean, at the end of the day, gardening, growing flowers is really about our relationship, a very intimate relationship with a place. And so even if we're in a new place, or even if we have to pick up and move, growing something immediately connects us to that place. And it helps us to know that place, to pay attention to that place, to be connected to that place. And I can't think of anything else that does that like gardening, like growing things. And so when I talk about being rooted, it isn't this ideal of never picking up, never uprooting yourself, never having to move, never having to say goodbye, never losing anything. But it is the way a garden heals our experience of moving, heals our experience of dislocation, and helps us again and again to feel rooted right where we are. Even if we're renting and we don't own, even if we don't have a backyard. When I was first learning to garden in Chicago, I just had a little balcony outside of our third floor apartment, but I learned to fill that balcony with window boxes full of flowers. And so I was able to put down roots even in that little rental apartment. So I just feel like this is something that many of us gardeners know, but I think the rest of the world needs to know. If you don't feel rooted, if you don't feel like you have a meaningful connection to the place where you are, I really think the answer is to grow something.
That's really beautiful. I couldn't agree more. I'm thinking back to the different places I've been in my life, and when I felt most connected is certainly when I have that attachment to where I am. And when I think about that, that is, like you said, whether it's growing in a container. When I first moved to Hood River with my husband, we went from a house in Portland, Oregon to a condo, and we had a small patio. And I packed that patio full with containers and I grew everything that I could in this shaded little space. But it's what made it feel like home to me and gave me a purpose while I was there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the feeling well. I've moved a lot, and I'm grateful to be more rooted now. But having lived in so many places, I know that gardening is for every place. And there is something about if you're willing to garden, even in a place where you are short term, I have found that you grow roots that actually move with you. So when you
Mm,
then move on to the next place, you are living in a more rooted way because of how you lived in the previous place. So in that sense, maybe we are like plants. Like we too can be transplanted, but the roots we grew go with us and change our relationship to every place where we find ourselves.
that's really beautiful. I'm thinking about that as I've literally been digging up all of my roots. And by the time this airs, I will be completely out of our old growing space and searching for whatever is next where we get to put our roots down. And it's
Right.
kind of an exciting thing, actually.
Mm.
I've just finished reading a book called The Gap and the Gain, and
Mm.
it's a mental mind shift book. And it talks about the only way to really measure life is to look backwards, not forwards. And I've been thinking so much because I'm literally digging up hundreds of, if not thousands, of roots from the ground over the last month. And I'm seeing what was once these several inch long peony roots are now 2 or 3 feet, and
Wow.
thinking about how much they've grown, but thinking about how much that garden has also helped me grow as
Yes.
well. I'm like, the garden was this gift to me
Yes.
that allowed me to grow. So I'm like, if I had to do this all over again, I would 100% go through it, even knowing the heartache of pulling everything out because of the life lessons, the connections I've made. Those roots are so deep in me that
Mhm.
your book came out at just the right time to speak
Mhm.
to me personally because it's so touching and it's such a great analogy. I love that everything we do in the garden is like this double story of our life, and the roots are such a huge part of that.
Oh, it's so true. You put it so well. We grow gardens, but gardens grow us. And if we care for gardens, if we're willing to care for them, they will care for us when we need it. And it's not just a cute saying; like it's real and it's powerful.
It's so powerful. It's something that's part of exactly why I wanted to create this podcast,
Mm.
was to inspire more people, whether they have a backyard or they have a flower farm or an open field or just a container on their patio,
Mhm.
that simple process of growing those roots will feed their soul. So
Yeah, it's true, and it's worth it, as you say, and even knowing what you know now, for you to say that it's worth it, that's very powerful. And I feel like for maybe a lot of people who are listening, they may be like I was, especially if they're not considering doing it as a business. It's one thing to
mhm,
consider becoming a flower farmer as for your livelihood, but it's another to think of doing it as a hobby or just for the joy of it. And I feel like then it's too easy to make a calculation that says, well, this is self-indulgent, or this is wasteful, this isn't practical, I'm not growing food. I mean, sure, there's edible flowers, but let's be honest, like it's not a practical way to feed our families necessarily. And so I questioned for a long time, am I crazy to want to do this? Is this wasteful? Is this selfish? And what I have learned is just absolutely, for a million reasons, no, it is not. And so if there's anyone listening thinking that, I have so many stories I could tell of just how life-changing it is and how world-changing it is. Like, you sow a seed and you are changing the world. You're
Mhm.
doing it and filling the world with beauty, and that matters. And we need more people doing that for sure.
Absolutely. I feel like after COVID, especially, we have been lacking that connection with other people. And
Yes,
I feel
yes.
like flowers gives us that connection, whether it's someone stopping and admiring the flowers growing in your yard or your field, or being able to hand off that bouquet from your backyard to someone going through a hard time, or just having a baby. The connection and joy that you're able to share with those, or
Yeah.
with others when you grow those flowers. It's not selfish. It's self-care, and it's
Hmm.
taking care of yourself and bringing joy. There's a lot more ways you can spend a lot of money on therapy when you
Yeah.
think of it.
That's true. And if you do this, you're feeding all these connections in the environment. You're benefiting not just yourself, but as you said, neighbors, other people. I mean, I write in the book about how the flower garden in my backyard has become a magnet for all the children in the neighborhood. And as my children grow up and leave home, I hope neighborhood kids will keep coming to my garden. And there's these sweet little girls who live next door who, for years, have come by and said, Miss Christie, can we visit your butterfly garden? And they
Oh.
call it the butterfly garden just because there are butterflies there. And so just the life that can flourish in a garden is so much bigger than us. And yeah, so when I write about connection, I'm talking about those kinds of connections and connections we have to other people, but also connections between all the life of our ecosystems, the pollinators, the birds, the butterflies, the animals, as well as the people. And we all know that those connections need to be nurtured and need to be cultivated. And to know that even I guess I'll put it this way, there's so many problems in our world, and I don't know about you, but I can feel powerless to do anything about them. I can feel like, well, what
Mhm.
can I do as one person? But one person can plant flowers. One person can care for bees and birds. One person can do that and can do it very easily and very simply, with a packet of flower seeds. And that, to me, I just don't, I can't think of anything else that offers that kind of power to change and affect the world, and have so much fun doing it. It's just wild. It's such a gift.
It totally is. So you have moved several times.
Hmm.
And your home where you are currently at in Pennsylvania is a Victorian farmhouse. You have a barn? You have a black barn? Is that what you
We
call
do,
it?
yes, yes, the Black Barn. Yeah. Yeah,
And
our home is, yeah, go ahead if I could tell you more about it, but if there's a particular question, feel free.
no, go ahead and tell us about it. And then if you don't answer my question, I'll ask it after.
Yeah, good, good. So it may sound idyllic, right? Victorian farmhouse, Pennsylvania, and it's beautiful. I love it here. This is home, and I do intend for it to go on always being our home. But for those who might be sitting in suburbia, I'll tell you, I'm sitting right in the middle of suburbia too. So yes, I'm in this old farmhouse, but the farm itself was sold off many years ago, and we have just a couple acres, and we're surrounded by a typical suburban builder's neighborhood. So people are often surprised when they first come and they drive down our long driveway, and they always say to me, "Oh, you're right. The neighbors are right here." So in some senses, I live just like many Americans in a very typical neighborhood, where, let's be honest, most of the backyards are given over just to lawn grass, not even a lot of trees. And so I feel like here in the middle of this neighborhood, maybe I also have a chance to kind of show a different way of being in our spaces and what's possible. So I do hope that the seeds I'm sowing here of just beauty and abundance can maybe even help people dream new dreams for their own little backyard plots. I mean, we can do so much with even a little bit of land.
I love that. That's so true that you don't have to have a huge space to make a big difference. And you even mentioned the connections. And I was thinking about that as I'm literally digging up all the roots that were planted in our field
Yes.
that was never ours. So it was leased land that I knew
Mm-hmm.
this would someday happen. It just happened sooner than I had hoped it would
Yeah.
happen. Um, when I first started using this land, it was a barren old field that years ago had cattle on it, but nothing had ever really been grown on it other than weeds. And we could barely dig into it when we first started.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 years later, seeing the connection with nature
Wow.
is incredible. And it gives me hope and inspiration that we can redo that again
Mm-hmm.
because it is full of microbial life.
Wow.
Every plant that I pull out of the ground is just crawling with worms. And when we started there, I couldn't find the first season, there was not a single worm to be found in that soil. You could
Incredible.
hardly break through it. Now you can just stick your hands into that dirt and it just falls through your hands.
Wow. And in only
So,
3 years. That's so
in just three
inspiring.
years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a long time to make a big difference. And
Mm-hmm.
granted, that 3 years we brought in beneficials. I
Mm-hmm.
did tons of foliar spray. I did not put down any chemicals other than Sluggo Plus was the only thing that I
Mm-hmm.
used that was not organic or earth friendly. I've stopped using neem oil to support the
Mm-hmm.
bees. At nighttime in the summer, you can hear the frogs and
Yeah.
you see the bats flying around. Granted,
Mm-hmm.
we do have some really tall evergreen trees right next to the property that helps with the birds and the bees, but we left our T-posts up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the birds would perch on it, and just seeing that connection with nature is really incredible. And you have an older farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that you have quite a connection with nature established at your property.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting to think about like legacy in this context because I think, especially if we're growing flowers and if we're growing annual flowers, it can feel as if every year we're starting from scratch, or we lose everything that we had. But if we think about it with this perspective of building soil, of supporting the larger ecosystem, that is where I think you start to see some of the legacy that we can leave if we're gardening and growing in this way. So one story I have is that we did some building work not too long ago and had to dig a trench for I think it was a line to our well or something like that, or electrical lines. And the man who was building the digging the trench came to me and he said, I'm assuming this was once an old a farm, that those houses, that this was a farm. So I said, yes, this was a farm, and told him a little bit about it. And he said, I knew as soon as the backhoe, or I don't know the terms, whatever little piece of equipment he was using to dig, he's like, I knew as soon as it touched the soil that this had been a farm, and he said that this had been cared for. He said,
Oh,
if I'm digging a trench, in some of these new neighborhoods where the top, things have been all turned over and topsoil removed, he said, it is a completely different experience. And that meant so much to me to hear. But I knew that especially where he was digging, he wasn't digging in my garden. He was kind of just digging in a spot that I hadn't really touched. So I knew that he was talking about something that had accrued over years, and that I could look back at all the farmers and gardeners, where there's been gardeners in this home too. And actually I write about one in Seed Time. I recently found the story of one of the gardeners from the 50s who lived in my house. Her name was Dorothy, and she grew roses, and I write a little
mm.
bit about her and her legacy in the book. So just thinking about, yes, even if the flowers fade at the end of the season, even if you're just cutting those bouquets and passing them on, it is adding up to something that matters. It's adding up to something good, and it's adding up to something that you'll leave behind you. And it's the soil, but it's so much more than that.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the roots and connections that you are either establishing or discovering at your farm?
Yeah, I mean, here's something else about gardens is that they're always changing, and I speak again, not as a flower farmer, but as a gardener, but as someone who is trying to do both. Like I try to do ornamental gardening and I also do some productive gardening. I do want to grow some food and I want to grow flowers to cut. So I'm trying to do both. Um, and it's always changing and it can feel sometimes like as much as I plant or do, I lose, I mean, anyone who grows knows like so much of what you try doesn't work or things die. Or I can think of, trees I planted and then we realized, oh, that's the spot where the new little barn needs to go. And then the tree has to get moved or cut down. And it can feel like, wow, is it adding up to anything? So I think writing these stories helped me to realize almost what was happening invisibly, happening to me, happening to my neighbors who come visit here, happening in the community when they realize, hey, there's a garden there, and maybe maybe I can do that too. So that more invisible and tangible fruit or harvest, if we want to talk about it that way. It's just been good for me to pause to reflect on those things. I can share one story specifically because this was early on in my flower gardening journey. Right after I had finally made the decision to not only have a big vegetable garden, but to have a kind of dedicated flower garden. And again, I had asked myself over and over, is it worth it? Am I being selfish? We had a really hard situation in my family where one of my sisters was unexpectedly widowed with 4 children. And it was such a time of just grief and sadness. But almost just months after that experience, she came with her kids. We had lots of room in this old farmhouse. She came and they just lived with us for a month or two, just to rest, just to kind of recover and try to figure out next steps. And the flower garden was in its second year, so it was still brand new, but it finally looked like a garden. That point where you realize like, oh, I did it. This actually looks and feels like a garden. And that whole month she was here in early summer, we just spent every day sitting out in that garden. Or I'd go out with my nieces and pick things, or we would pick weeds and then feed them to the chickens. And we just lived in this space. And I realized then, oh my goodness, I had no idea how much we would need it, how much it would comfort us, how much it could be a part of healing. Just to be surrounded by beauty at a time when we, were grieving and she was grieving and life felt really chaotic. And I kept thinking, and it's like, we don't know until we look backwards, right? I think you and I were talking about that earlier, maybe
Mm-hmm.
even before we hit record, that we kind of look backwards and we see the meaning. And so I could look back then and say, oh my goodness, I thought this was selfish, or I worried it was self-indulgent. And I had no idea how this garden would help and would make a difference in our lives and in my sister's life, and in the life of our family. So that is just one story particular to me, that I think just proves we never know. But when we sow beauty into the world, when we sow abundance, when we sow life, it's going to have an impact. It's going to do things that surprise us. And so for me, that those are the using these words, roots and connection and wholeness. That's really what I'm talking about. I'm trying to get at this bigger picture, this kind of almost this mystery of gardening, this mystery of flowers. I mean, I don't know. I bet a lot of your listeners have people say, well, why don't you grow food? Why don't you grow, corn? Why don't you grow, why don't you grow things people need? I mean, I could just hear the voices, right?
Sure.
And I guess I want to say, we just have no idea how much we need beauty and we need the kind of life that flowers bring to the world. We need it so much more than we realize, and other people need it. And it looks like these things, like feeling rooted, feeling more connected, feeling a wholeness in yourself and in the world. And then, the final word I explore is hope. And we all need we all need hope. But I think gardeners, especially, we're flower farming is difficult work. Our climate is changing and is chaotic in ways that are really can push us to despair, I think. And so it was important to me to really explore all the ways that gardening builds a really resilient hope, and a
Mm-hmm.
tangible hope. And I don't know, I think you hand someone a bouquet of flowers, like you are handing them hope, really, big, just beautiful bunch of hope. Um, yeah, it's true in my life, and I know I could see it's true in yours, and I just want more people to experience that. And I want tired gardeners and tired flower farmers to know that their work matters so much, so important.
It really does. And sometimes you may never know who
Yes.
you impact. I was really blessed to hear stories about our flower farm before I knew that we weren't going to be able to continue in the same space. We border the field that we've been leasing. So, our own house, we're not moving our house. So, right now, we're just going to simplify this year,
Mhm.
really focus in on our dahlia breeding and maximize our space and put as many roots down here that we can. But we built a low fence between the two properties so that people could see the flowers that we were growing. And it was amazing. I didn't realize until people shared with me that they were altering their daily walks because we are in a suburban setting.
Mm.
I had neighbors that would come and just sit and watch or take pictures of the flowers from the fence line. And unfortunately, because we are a production farm, we're not set up for this beautiful walk through the aisles. I am constantly forgetting shears or there's tripping hazards. So it wasn't where people could come in, but I wanted them to be able to see the beauty.
Mhm.
And this fall, one of my neighbors shared with me, she said, Jen, isn't it amazing how your flowers have a way of meeting people exactly where they are?
Oh, wow.
And that phrase has really hung on to me this
Mhm.
last year and carried me, is that flowers really do have this ability to meet us where we're at. And when you were talking about that hope and connection and wholeness and asking, is it worth growing flowers versus
Mhm.
vegetables?
Mhm.
That answer for me is such an easy yes after watching COVID. When COVID
Yeah.
hit, I had just barely started our CSA program and I was wondering, am I going to be able to sell a single bouquet of flowers?
Mhm.
I was able to sell every flower I could get my hands on. And I did a contactless drop off CSA during COVID. And people told me that those flowers gave them hope. There was
Yeah.
something just seeing those flowers, meeting them where they're at, being able to have life inside their house when we weren't
Mhm.
able to physically connect with
Mhm.
others was just like having food. It nourished the soul.
Mhm.
It's
It
just like
does.
food nourishes our body, the flowers nourish our soul. And you do
Mhm.
such an eloquent job of showing that and showcasing that in your books. So, this is a really fun conversation that we're having.
Mhm.
Let's talk more about that hope. Can
Yeah.
you share any more stories about how flowers have provided hope for you or that you have witnessed?
Mhm. Yeah, there's something about the cyclical nature of gardening, um, and I do live in a yeah, I mean, it's true for anyone who grows. I feel especially, being in Pennsylvania where we still do have 4 distinct seasons, and so this constant shift through the year and the way that the garden returns year after year after year, and that you're going through this cycle where everything dies, everything falls asleep, everything goes dormant or sets its seed and disappears, and then comes back and then is renewed. And it's not just a metaphor, because there's something about living that cycle year after year that I really think just almost builds in us an expectation that life will return, that spring will come. I think it has changed how I live through winter, not just literally. It has changed how I feel about winter literally, but just the winters of life, those seasons that are more hopeless, more gray, harder times of life. Um, it's like gardening has built up this sure sense that winter does not last forever. It never does. And that if we can be patient, if we can endure, if we can continue sowing seeds and believing in beauty and good things, that spring will come again. And this is good news, I think, because it's not something we have to do. It's just something we receive. It's something we just live. It's how the earth, how the world is set up for us. And so I think inevitably it builds this kind of hope. But I will tell you, the hardest chapter or the hardest essay for me to write comes at the end of the book, and is it's about hope. What do I call it? Hope in an age. I'm flipping through the book. Hope in an age of climate chaos. I'm someone who loves cold weather. I love winters. I love snow. I don't like change. So the way that the climate in my own garden is changing is hard, and I don't like
Mm-hmm.
it. And I really struggle to keep a positive attitude or to hold on to hope in the midst of it. Right now, as we record, it's still February, and yet I've got a thunderstorm outside. I don't have snow. I don't have even ice. And so when I got to the end of this book, I knew I have to figure out how do you hold on to hope, or what does it look like to receive hope from gardening um, in this context. My garden zone just officially changed from zone 6 to zone 7. I already knew it was obvious, but it's official now, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, and without giving it away, I'll just say that what I discovered in writing that is that I do feel hopeful because of my garden. I think it means, because I have a garden, I don't have to let the headlines or the news be the final word on anything. I can go out in my garden, and right now, the hellebores are gorgeous. The
Mm.
snowdrops are stunning. The witch hazels I have look incredible, so beautiful. There's so much beauty out there right now at the end of February, and I'm grateful. And we've had some warm days, and I've been able to get out and actually be in my garden a little bit this month. And every time I realize, you know what, this may be because of a hard reality that I'm grappling with, and the whole earth we're grappling with, our changing climate. But today is good. Today, my garden is giving me this gift of flowers and sunshine, and so I receive that, and I take hope from that. And so I think if we're going to continue, despite whatever the challenges are, it might be climate change, or others of you might just be finding it economic challenges, or, just physical challenges. Gardening is a physical labor. There's all kinds of things that can push us to feel hopeless. But then the garden speaks to that. The garden, has something to offer us: beauty and life, or like the resiliency of life, even when
Mm-hmm.
things are challenging, is so. It just inspires so much hope in me. So I just, for myself, was so glad that I was pushed to have to write myself all the way, ask these hard questions, face my own discouragement and despair, and say, I have hope because of my garden, and because there is still goodness here and still life and beauty here, no matter what. No matter what, always it comes back.
That's beautiful. I always say that I'm hopelessly optimistic,
Oh,
and
I
it
love
comes
that.
from the garden or from the flower farm. I think
Yeah.
every time when I feel like something is hard or it's not going to make it, I think back and I think about when plant has been knocked over in our 50-mile-per-hour winds, and a week later, all of a sudden, there's a new sprout coming up
Yeah.
out of the ground, and there it is.
Yeah.
It has that will to survive,
Yeah.
and it teaches us that there's always hope, like you said. So
Hmm.
that's really
Hmm.
beautiful. Is there anything else that you cover in your book that we haven't talked about that you can give a little hint to?
Yeah, great question. I will say, I mean, I've talked a lot about just the themes and the stories, but I definitely try in my books to offer tips. I write quite a bit about native plants and what that looks like for me, not with any agenda or, finger wagging, but again, hopefully in an encouraging, hopeful way. So there's a lot in here about what that can look like for those of us who love flowers and love beauty. I mean, like you, I love my dahlias. I love my zinnias, but I think it's like once you enter into one part of gardening, it's just connected and connected and connected to so many other things. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
someone who, when I started gardening, would not look twice at an ornamental grass. It just held no appeal to me at all. And now I'm just smitten, or once I got into ornamental grasses, I thought, but those sedges, I don't really get why people. I don't know about sedges. And this year, I'm so excited about carex, about sedges. So I think it's in the book, but I leave our listeners with that, is to let yourself feel the way your passion for one thing can overflow into new interests and new joys, and we can remain sort of faithful to our first loves. For me, it would be roses and dahlias for sure. But that it's almost like a mother who has one child and then a second and then a third. It's like your heart grows and you have more love for more babies. And that has definitely been my experience in the garden. Because this isn't my first gardening book. And my first one was all about the roses and all about the dahlias and the individual flowers. And the fact that I've now written one celebrating things like grasses and chickens and bees is just wild to me. But it is, I think it testifies to the way that gardens grow us and fill us with new things. So I just encourage your listeners to let their passions, overflow wherever it's taking them. Just follow it.
That's beautiful advice. Now, this is your fourth garden book you've written. Is that correct?
So this is the third.
The third.
Is this the third? Yeah, this is the third. So this is kind of a little trilogy of just beautiful little full color books. I just love how they've been designed with these ribbon bindings. And so the first was Garden Maker, and then A Home in Bloom, and now Seed Time and Harvest sort of completes that trilogy. But I also write memoirs. So I have two memoirs that came out before the garden books, in which, of course, I still write about my gardens, but they aren't this kind of full color with photography. And that's another thing I have loved learning is taking photos in my garden in order to just capture that beauty. And, some people dry their flowers or press them, and I take photographs. So
I love it. That's what I do. Well, I was a professional photographer for 12 years
wow.
and just recently officially closed up the photography business so I can be fully present for the flower farm. But that was one thing that I really loved in your book is the abundance of really beautiful, detailed photographs.
Thank you.
That really caught my eye. That's one thing. I was so busy last year that I really didn't have the time to slow down. I have thousands of iPhone pictures.
Yeah.
But here I am, I was a past professional photographer. And I'm like, I took 400 pictures with my good camera last year, which is nothing. I mean, on a typical wedding day when I would shoot weddings, I would take easily 4,000 photos. So 400's a drop in a bucket. So this year, my goal is to get more of those. And another thing that has been really on my heart lately, and maybe some of our listeners would be curious about this as well, I have started writing down some of my lessons from the garden and just doing a little bit of journaling. Can you share how you got your start into writing these books, or any advice that you could give us for someone that wants to just sit down with a pen and paper and take in their lessons and stories from the garden?
I love that these days with our online world, it's so accessible. Anyone can start writing and start sharing their words with the world. And so it could be on Instagram, starting what is essentially, you can start an online like a garden journal where you have an image, and then you just take some time with that caption. You can go with a Substack or a blog, and I love that because there's some accountability. So that's really how I got started is with my my blog. And there's the accountability, and there's the immediate feedback, when you connect with readers. And then there's just that discipline of just practicing. And so even though I had a background in literature and writing and reading, I needed that in order to even to figure out actually that I really did want to write about nature and gardens. That wasn't something I necessarily even knew going into it. I think as well, it hones our observation. So that so much of growing is just slowing down enough to really pay attention to what's happening. Big problems start very small, and if you're not paying attention, and the same with beauties, we can zip right by them if we're not out there paying attention. So if you're committed to writing, as I have been, then you're committed to paying attention. And essentially that's all it is saying, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to pay attention to my life. I'm going to pay attention to this garden. And then I'm going to write some of that down. You don't have to get fancy. It doesn't take any more skill than that. It is literally just paying attention. And once we pay attention, that too is something that helps us to feel rooted, connected, whole, and full of hope, is because we're paying attention to what is actually out there. So that's really it. It's just that exercise in paying attention. And I think even if you don't see yourself as a writer, it is so worth doing. And again, the tools are accessible: Instagram, Substack, blogs. You can do it. Facebook posts, even, you can begin. And people are hungry for beauty and hungry for reflections and words on the gardening life as well. So I'm so glad you're going to be doing that.
Yes. So, what's next for you? Are you going on a book tour? Are you starting on your next book? What is in store?
Yeah, I do have some more books in the pipeline, which I'm very excited about. There may even, this is a real sneak peek here that I haven't even talked about. But in a year or so, there is going to be a garden, or really a flower garden journal from me,
Ooh.
which was so fun to work on, because I'm really not a journal keeper. I'm not a planner. Um, and and so at first I thought, well, I can't do that. Why would I do a flower garden planner? And there's others on the market. But then I realized, oh my goodness, even the non-planners like myself, we need books. We need tools to help us dream and help us, envision our gardens and keep a garden record. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to write the flower garden planner that works for non-planners, that works for dreamers, that works for beauty lovers. So I'm so excited that will be out next year. And in terms of my own garden, oh, I have so many plans, and mostly they involve growing many more dahlias this year. And some of those new floret seeds. Well, I mean, she's had them for a while, but I managed to get some of the zinnias, especially. So I'm really excited to try out florets, special zinnias this summer as well.
That's exciting. So, are you growing your flowers from seed?
Yeah. So in my cut, I have raised beds, and in my cut garden area, I do grow all of that from seed. I'm lucky in this old house to have a root cellar, and that's where I overwinter my dahlia tubers. And it is wonderful, because it means that I'm pretty successful at keeping them, even though I am not so skilled. It's not my skill. It is just that wonderful dark humidity that is down in that dirt floor root cellar. So the tubers will come back out, new tubers will join them, and then I haven't started any seeds yet, but I think in the next couple of weeks, the seed starting will begin. I love it, because it's like spring comes early.
Oh, that's really exciting. So, what other flowers are you looking forward to growing?
Let's see. I do have some more David Austin roses coming. I'm always a David Austin fan. They don't necessarily love my hot, humid southeastern PA climate, but I love them. And so, even if I have discovered that they don't live forever for me, just our swings in temperature are really hard on them. They're so beautiful, so special. I love the perfume that a few more bare root roses always make their way to me each winter. So I'm excited to get those in the ground. And I'll throw one out for the food growers as well. I have moved garden spaces a bit, so I haven't had as many raised beds, but I'm hoping to have a big space for growing in raised beds this summer. So I'll be able to do some things like ground cherries again, which I love. I love getting heirloom ground cherry seeds from Seed Savers org. And some Japanese sweet potatoes, which are a favorite with
Oh,
our family. They're just the kind of thing you can't really buy at the grocery store, so they're worth planting, and they're so delicious. They have a purple skin and a white flesh. So
ooh.
they're nutritious like sweet potatoes. They taste like sweet potatoes, but I think that white color helps the kids think that they're just potatoes. So, oh,
Where
there's
do you
so much.
source those from?
Online catalogs, I forget exactly if I got mine from Burpee this year, but they're pretty accessible online, and you can literally just Google Japanese sweet potatoes. We had friends
Okay.
who lived in Japan for a number of years, and she was the one who actually introduced me to them. And I thought, oh, there's no way I'll be able to get those. And then I discovered, no, they're pretty accessible online. So you get the little rooted dried up little potatoes, and it's so easy to grow a crop. So I'm looking forward to having room for that again.
I love that. Well, kind of going back to growing roots, you mentioned that you're a mom and you have a couple children.
Mm-hmm.
How are you involving your children in the garden?
Yeah, that's been such a gift. It's just a garden in and around my kids. So I have one in college, one graduating from high school this year, two still with me at home. And actually, my youngest, my daughter, has some photographic cameos in the book. Um, you know, it's been up and down. So I will say there have been many times where I thought, okay, this isn't how I imagined it. I thought the kids would be more helpful, or I thought they would be more interested. Um, and so their interest, it waxes and wanes for sure. But I could look back at my own childhood and know that I too was growing up around my father's garden, and I didn't help. I wasn't interested, and yet it was doing its work on me. And so I am already seeing, as my kids are getting older, that they take the beauty of a garden for granted in a way that I love, that I
Mm-hmm.
know one day, they'll be in their own adult lives, in their own adult homes, and they will want something of what they had when they were kids, and they'll learn how to do it. Or they'll do what I did for many years, which was I would call my dad and say, "Oh, Dad, how did you do that? Help me out with this." And I hope they'll do that too. So, yeah, I think just to encourage the moms who maybe had a vision or a dream of how it would be, and who may be feeling disappointed or like, should I make these kids work in the garden? Should I just say, like, it is impacting them, and it just may not be always so visible. So yeah, my kids, I have one or two that are more helpful than the others. I do pay my sons to help me out, especially now that they're bigger and stronger, and I enjoy working with them. But I have to give them the cash to make it worth their while. But just having this place where we can be, even if they're just out playing with the dog and I'm weeding, it's worth it because we're immersed in beauty together. So I actually sometimes tell my kids, like, oh, I can't wait one day to see the garden that you grow. I can't wait to come to your house and help you in your garden.
I love that. So your children are older. My daughter is 9.
Mm,
And so we're at that phase where I know she sees what I'm doing. She's not super interested, but
yeah.
yet when it comes to the fragrances, I potted up some daffodils
Mm,
inside the house and I forced them and they're blooming right now. And it's Sir Winston Churchill and they smell amazing.
yeah.
And I watched her the other day. She was eating her food and then she stands up at the table and they're right in the center of the table and she just takes a big whiff of them and closes her eyes. And I was thinking, someday she's going to smell daffodils and think back to mom's
Yeah.
garden.
Hmm.
And at this point, I don't try and force it. I would love to have her more involved, but when she wants to and
Yeah.
she's inspired, I'll let her grab scissors and she can harvest a bouquet and we give her a little space in the garden that's her garden. But some of the best things we do are just go around and look at the connections in the
Mm.
garden. We look for the ladybugs and we look for the
Hmm.
praying mantis egg sacs, and
Yes.
she releases the beneficials with me to do her part in knowing how she is helping the garden grow. But I think as you were talking about all of this, I was in my mind thinking, our children maybe aren't super excited, but like you said, they're watching. And it's
Yeah.
like metaphorically, those roots are being
Yes.
planted and they're
Hmm.
growing. But
Hmm.
just like a plant, those roots grow really slowly.
Right. Right. Yes.
And I
Yeah.
just see that happening. And that was that analogy just came to my mind. So thank you for sharing that. That
Yes.
was a
And
good reminder.
I could even sort of testify from my own family. So my father was a gardener. He and my mom had 4 kids, just like I have 4, and none of us helped him in the garden. None of us were interested. And he still talks about that. He still will say, "None of you kids were interested. None of you helped me out." But all 4 of us today garden in some way. We all grow things, to different in different ways, different abilities, different places. But we are all gardeners. And I think that speaks to just the power of being immersed in a garden, even if as kids we weren't that interested. I feel like the odds of all 4 of us doing this, like that can't be a coincidence. And I know it's because we grew up in our father's garden.
Absolutely. I know my love for gardening stems from my mom's garden
Mhm.
and my aunt and uncle. They grew tons of cut flowers. My mom had more
Oh,
of a,
wow.
she was never a master gardener, but I thought of her garden in that way where it was always
Yeah.
perfectly landscaped and beautiful and had lots of color everywhere. And she spent tons of time caring for it and nurturing it. And I didn't really think of it until I had my own land that I was
Yeah.
able to nurture. And it was rooted in me that
Yes.
I craved it. And so I think that's a beautiful lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like if we look at it this way, we're satisfying hungers in them that they may not even realize that they have. But when they grow
Mm.
up and leave, they will be hungry for flowers, hungry for beauty, hungry for plants, and they'll know that that is a hunger that can be satisfied because they've seen it, and that will give them confidence. I know it's the only thing that gave me confidence to say yes to my friend when she invited me to garden with her in that community garden. I think otherwise I just would have assumed, oh no, I don't know how to do that. I no. But I knew, oh, that is a possible thing. Okay, let's see. So I have hope for my own kids.
I love that. That seed once sown has
Yes,
given you
yes,
all this hope and
yes.
connection and wholeness in your life that ties right back into your book.
Yeah.
So, we've talked a lot about your book today. Christy, if people want to now go and get your book, where can they find
Mhm.
it?
Yeah, well, anywhere books are sold. So, of course, it's in the usual places like Amazon and barnesandnoble.com and all those places. So, you can find it there. If they want to keep up with me, I've got a website, christiepurifoy.com. I'm easy to find. Or if they just want to see my garden, of course, I'm on Instagram. And yes, I hope people will find the books. It's, before I was a gardener, I was a reader and a book lover. And it has been just the privilege of my life to work with a publishing team who create such beautiful books. So, as a writer, I can control that part of it and the photographs, of course, but I can't control cover design and end papers. And yet, I'm just blown away with what they've created. I mean, the botanical drawings on the end papers, they're just beautiful objects, the way that a bouquet is a beautiful work of art to behold. So I just am filled with gratitude that I get to share these books with the world. So thank you for inviting me here and helping me to spread the word, and because we need more flowers and I think we need more beautiful books in this world for sure.
I agree. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today. And I will provide links in today's show notes to your social media website and your book links as well. You also are the host of a podcast. You didn't mention that. Do you want to share a little
Yes.
bit about your podcast?
Yeah, so every Wednesday, Out of the Ordinary podcast, a longtime friend and I, Lisa Jo Baker, we met actually back in Chicago about the time I started gardening. We have both ended up as writers and authors. And 5 years ago, she said, we have such great conversations when we're together. I feel like we should share them with more people. So for 5 years now, we have been sharing conversations, and it's really just two friends at the table talking about ordinary life, and how extraordinary it is, really, that everything good and extraordinary has its roots, quite literally, in just our daily ordinary lives. And so we're just all about celebrating the goodness of ordinary life, and just talking about everything under the sun. So, yep, you can find Out of the Ordinary podcasts on any of the podcast apps and platforms. And it's been really fun these years to share our friendship and our conversations with a whole audience of listeners. And so that's one more place where I can be found every Wednesday.
I love that. I look forward to checking it out myself. I listen to lots of podcasts in the garden as I'm working
It's
out in the field.
perfect for gardening, isn't it? Yeah, audiobooks and podcasts just make gardening even that much more fun, I think.
It's one of the joys of
Uh-huh.
my time out in the field for sure.
Uh-huh.
Well, Christy, it's been such a joy to chat with you today. Before we say goodbye, is there any parting advice or last minute advice that you would like to give to our listeners today?
Don't give up. Sow those seeds. Um, I definitely end each gardening season with a bit of tiredness and discouragement, but here we are coming around on another spring, and everything's going to wake up again. So, anyone who's still feeling that tiredness, I just really want to say it is worth it. Keep going, and we're cheering for you, and we can't wait to see the flowers that you'll grow.
I love it. Yes, we are definitely cheering for all of you because the world needs more joy and
Yeah.
more hope.
Mhm.
So, thank you so much for joining us. And Maybe the next time you're ready to release your next garden book or your
Yes.
garden journal, we can have you back on the podcast to talk about it.
Let's do it. I would love that so much. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day. We'll talk again soon. Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of the Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, you're contributing to the local flower movement, and we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.